So last year we read Crescent City by Sarah J Maas. So when Lana decided to recommend A Court of Thorns and Roses, ACOTAR, this month, I was thinking, oh, this isn't going to be too bad until I started reading it. And then I felt kind of bad because she went through such an effort to not DNF my last book. I had to finish this one too. I can't help but think that she set me up to fail.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Reading Crossbow podcast. My name is Lana, and as usual, I'm here with my co-host Rob.
Hey Lana, I'm excited to talk to you this week about your book ACOTAR because this is might be the worst thing we've read on the show. And I'm excited to talk to you about that because this is my least favorite thing.
Wow, why am I not surprised to hear you say that? Like, I recommended this book to you. Actually, I didn't think it would be that bad. You came across a bit stronger than I thought you would. I might say, like, yeah, there's some parts of this I like, but you straight up are like, no, this sucks. Really?
Yeah, it fails at all the narrative devices that it has available to it. Now, I'm saying that I actually kind of really liked Crescent City, the first book in a different Sarah J Maas series. I think I might have been a little I could maybe even pull up their rating a little bit since I've had time to sit on that, but this book is bad. And
Oh man.
and I was actually expecting something very different after having read Crescent City.
Okay. Okay. So this is interesting because this is a good setup. And one of the reasons I really wanted to do this episode, and I know that it was a huge commitment from you, and I want to thank you. Everybody thank Robert in the comments if you read Romantasy, because I don't think he wanted to do this. And I purposefully gave him a book he wouldn't like because I think this is just a hypothesis that you might actually like this first book better after you've read the second book. So that's going to be a
Okay.
test incoming, you guys. Let's wait for it. But I hope I'm not wrong on that. But before I do, I mean, I think I already know the answer. Would you have finished this book if I hadn't made you?
I think I would have because I was waiting for the payoff I felt like there was going to be a payoff for all of this story that had been building. And I mean, it wasn't there, and that was the disappointment. But because I remembered like Crescent City had such a terrific third act. It it really like tugged at all the heartstrings. It had a great third act, which was my favorite part of that book. And I was waiting for that in this book, and then it just never arrived. So I think I might have finished this one just because we had read the last one. If we hadn't have read Crescent City, I probably would have junked this one.
Okay, so it would have been a DNF. So I almost have to. The way I'm hearing that is A Court of Thorns and Roses is probably a book you'd finish just because of all the hype that there is out there. You expect to think like the payoff's coming, like you said.
Yes.
But let's say you're a reader that didn't have that hype at all. You just picked this up fresh. Do you think most readers like you would DNF this?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many parts of this book where like it just fails to deliver on its own premise, and it's a slog to get through this book, and I
Oof.
hated it.
Oh, man. Okay. I don't think it's a slog, but for more information on why I don't think so and why I got through it, because I also don't think it's the best first book, you can go back to my episode and we'll put up a card on why I think Sarah J Maas is successful in her writing and why I think different types of readers from every generation tune in. I'm serious, from your teens to your grandmas. Why is she such a best-selling author? So, episode on that. Also, just weird note, doesn't really matter. We're recording at a different time, so I'm getting this weird light. Might change. Okay, so real quick, I'm going to talk about other books in the romantic fantasy genre that might also be DNFs. And so I actually put Crescent City up here, even though I personally don't think it's a DNF. It is way too long. We've been over this book. Another card up at the top for this episode if you want to check this out. I love the Crescent City series. It is not done yet, so more coming from that. Also, a connection, somewhat, I'm going to call spoiler alert, calling a spoiler alert real quick. Do you have time? Fast forward, to A Court of Thorns and Roses. So these books at some point will connect and have already made a little connection, not plot wise. So that hasn't happened yet. So not a big spoiler if you're not there. But anyway, I have heard several people say that Crescent City was DNF. Now, this pays off considerably after you get into the second and third books, which are already out, and the story gets really rich, really deep. Sarah J Maas is an excellent world builder, fantastic even. All right, so another series in the Romantasy that is often a DNF would be, I don't have the first one here, I have A Throne of Glass. However, that is by far my favorite series from Sarah J Maas. You guys have heard me say this. I still keep thinking of Manon. I will not be sad if Maas goes on and makes a whole series or trilogy just on that character, or it needs to happen, whether prequel or before, whatever needs to happen. I put the Assassin's Blade on here because a lot of people don't go backwards in the series, or they read this in sequential order when this came out after A Throne of Glass, but it's technically the first book since it's a prequel. I actually think the first two books of that series, A Throne of Glass, are actually not great. I liked the Assassin's Blade for one particular character, but I didn't like it for the main female protagonist. So this is a series that I think, if you haven't read it yet, will end up being better for you than ACOTAR if you haven't read it. It is fantastic. 5 stars. Throne of Glass, great. First two books, kind of trash. Also, Serpent and Dove. This is a book that both neither Rob or I rated super high. I think I rated it higher just because I had a feeling it would get better. But I'm actually in the middle of reading those next books now, and I have a future episode coming out to talk about this trilogy. So anyhow, a lot to talk about. Quicksilver even has another book coming out on November 18th that I'm interested in. So, I think a lot of times this happens in romantic fantasy if the author is trying to really world build, which a lot of them seem to be doing right now. But I talked a long time about that, Rob. I'm curious, maybe not in romantic fantasy. Have you experienced any books that were DNFs for you? For books that you like to read?
So, funny enough, actually, I don't DNF books very often. It's kind of like movies. I rarely turn off a movie because I feel like someone felt like this was a good idea. So I'm waiting. I'll finish out at least the one book. I may not pick up a sequel, but I'll often finish the book or a movie because someone really liked it and thought this was worth, consuming. But funny enough, one of the first books I DNF'd, and one of the very few, was actually Game of Thrones. My friend in junior high actually gave me this book and was like, "Hey, you should read this." And I think I was not in the right mental state to really enjoy that book, and so I think I only read maybe a few dozen chapters and then I abandoned it. And years later, when I finally got around to reading it, I was like, man, I had missed out because that first book actually is an amazing book. But I do understand a little bit where you have series where it may have a portion of the book of the series that's just not great. I've talked many times on here my love of the Dresden Files, and many fans will actually point out when they're recommending the Dresden Files to their friends, they'll say the first 4 books or so are not the best writing. And maybe Harry, the main character, he comes across not always as, he can be a little much for a new reader who's not expecting it. So I get how some people don't like it. I myself really enjoyed those books. In fact, I actually read the books at the same age as Harry was supposed to be during those early books. And so I think I ended up understanding that character a little bit more because I also was, a bit obnoxious when I was young. But also, famously, Wheel of Time has a section in the books from about book 7 to book 10 that is fondly called the slog by fans of Wheel of Time, because that section of that series, the pacing changes tremendously compared to what comes before and what comes after. And so fans of Wheel of Time will often tell new readers, first time readers of Wheel of Time, hey, just push through. It's worth it. The payoff is there. But these 3 to 4 books or so in Wheel of Time are not anyone's favorite. So I understand, but yeah, this specific book is a deep challenge for me.
So I picked up on a bit of what you said because I also DNF'd Game of Thrones just because that was such a complicated freaking book to read. And I think we've both said this a few times in different episodes, is that is rough. Although I finished the entire series, and even though some people say it ended bad, I actually liked it. So I'm in the minority there. On another note though, I think it's actually fair that we talk about books that, like, some of the best first books that we've read. I think I know one right offhand. We don't have to name many, but like, what's one of the best first books, and maybe the other books went more downhill or then didn't quite live up to it that you've come into. So we'll do the opposite right now.
For me, just off the top of my head, the one of the best first books I remember reading was actually In the Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, because it's such an engaging story from day one in that book. The very first page, like, that whole book is tremendously engaging, and it's really great when you have a book series that pulls you in from the first page. And for me, that was one of them. What about you?
I've not read that one, but one of the best first books I've ever read was in the Expanse series. I love Leviathan Wakes, and I think that there's like not many other books that were that good from the start. Such a good series if you guys haven't read that. I haven't finished The Expanse yet. I think there's, what, 9 of them? I can't quite remember. And I'm like 5 or 6 in. But I'd gotten too much Space Cowboy, and so I just didn't quite finish the series. It was just too much of the same thing for me. I'm not saying it's bad, because I know a lot of people have read through all of that and they're like, yeah, let's go. But the variety didn't change enough. But maybe I could be wrong because I didn't go far enough, and I'll always wonder that, so I will go back to it. But great first book, same after.
Leviathan Wakes, I couldn't agree more. That is a tremendous first book, and actually, I would even lean towards one of my favorites in that whole series was that one book. So that's a great suggestion.
So good. But on that note, we talked about, really, really bad first books, and that's where we're at for this episode. And we threw in a couple good ones there. But back to ACOTAR. Why is this a DNF, really? Like, I kind of want to know, at what moment for you did you get that DNF moment of like, if Lana wasn't making me read this, I'd be out?
I think for the most part, when I really felt that is during the third act, the games part of this, when she was basically given the drugs and basically was, forced to perform in front of large audiences. And I was like, nothing about this book is paid off at all. Like, at every opportunity, this book has like given like possible like solutions and answers, and it was during that section when I was like, everything has just been a complete loss of agency for this character. She showed a tiny bit of agency and immediately had it yanked away once again. And I think it was, but I had a lot of problems with the book throughout, but I think that's when I probably would have just been like, I hate this book and I need to put it down, because I still might have finished it, but I struggled at that point because I was like, nothing about this book has actually been very entertaining to me. And it was very irritating.
I love that you brought up agency, because I think Farah, the lead character, is one of the characters in this types of books as the most agency I've ever seen. So it's interesting because I agree with you in the first book. She shows a ton of agency in the beginning, right? She's choosing to go out, fend for her family, feed her family. She could do a lot of things and she doesn't. She's the one that's the caretaker, the provider. She does all of these things. However, when she needs it most, like she starts showing agency throughout the very beginning of the book, and when she needs it most and when there's the most opportunity for her to do so, it's ripped from her, and that is in those games. It's very disappointing. She can't read, so she can't pull the right lever, right? She can't solve a poem that is like the most obvious like riddle. It's a riddle that I've ever heard in my life. The second I read that thing, I'm like, are you kidding me? This can't be it. I must be wrong. It can't be this easy. And it is that easy, and you're like, no, right? And then Resond does everything for her, like everything. And it's just like, this is the most frustrating because we've set up, Sarah J Maas has set up a female character who actually, and later on in the books you'll see, does so much with her power. And it's so cool. And so I think that's one of the reasons this book is such a fail, is because we actually start with a good female character that just totally is stripped of all of it in the end. And that's a disappointment.
And one of the things, especially like from Crescent City and many of the books we read, especially these really big, lengthy novels, is the understanding is this is a world building novel. This is going to be setting up a interactive and, exciting world for these characters to enjoy them or to experience and, struggle with. And yet, as I was going through this book, I was finding that this was like the Jon Snow world building. And what I mean by that is you know nothing. Like, supposedly there's all these different types of fae. You know nothing about them. There's all these different courts. You know their titles, but that's it. Like there's all this stuff about these big villains, but you don't really or aren't really given any opportunity to learn from that or experience that. So it felt just very empty for me. There wasn't the payoff of at least this is a cool world that's being built. And then the other part that really stood out to me, other than agency, is, we talk about things like Chekhov's gun, which is a, script writing technique where you show a gun in one scene, you should be using it in a following scene. And in this case, I was kind of jokingly, I was like, this is like Chekhov's flaccid peen, because they'll show you stuff and then it goes nowhere. For example, like someone is able in this book to get around the Fae mind magic. They're seemingly immune to it. And you're like, oh, well, maybe it's this item they have with them. That's what did it, or something like that. This is going to pay off. Like, this is going to pay off at the end, because this will be how Pharaoh will realize, oh, I can use this to overcome the challenge at the end. No. Nothing about what's set up in the beginning helps resolve the story at the end. It's all just random things. I struggled with this one because it felt like there's lots of opportunities here. It just, none of them actually seemed to pay off.
So I think some of what you're saying is going to pay off in A Court of Mist and Fury. Hang in there. Now, A Court of Mist and Fury has its own issues, but they're separate from those issues, okay? But these issues are going to get solved, okay? Farah is going to get her agency. She's going to say no to people left and right. She's going to get told, don't do that, and then go do that. And she basically is the one taking care of, well, a couple characters in the next book. So I love that about her. She's going to step into her own, and almost she's going to step backwards into how she was like originally written at the beginning of the book, because she was doing that. Like everything she was doing for her family in her home world before stepping into the fairy realm continues. Like I feel like she finds that again, which is interesting.
Yeah, all of her time in the human world are absolutely, she shows agency, but not so much in the fae world.
Yeah, not yet. which is disappointing, but that's okay. So, and then the other part of that, which is the world building, just the next book alone is going to take us through a few courts, and we're going to meet different people from those courts. And we're also going to get exposed to some of the old gods that are part of this world. So how did the world get shaped? How did it all come to be? And we go in and out of these different areas. So we get exposed to a lot more of the map. The map is something else we usually cover Show Me the Map in this episode, but that's not what this is about today. So maybe we'll touch on Show Me the Map when we hit A Court of Mist and Fury. But I was also curious because there's a lot of reasons to not love the first book. For people like me, there's a lot of reasons to continue pushing through the first book. Because I'll admit, I don't think it's a great first book. I'm trying to remember why I continued reading, and I think the reason why I continued reading is because I can't remember if I bought the whole set, or I did buy the whole set because I read A Throne of Glass first, and I had bought the first two and not in the full set, and they don't match, which pisses me off for my shelf. So I was like, I'm just gonna buy all of ACOTAR. Sarah J Maas is great. So I already had all the books. So like, why wouldn't I read it? Plus, there was some steamy stuff. There's steamy stuff, you guys. If you love that, it's there. But anyway, that's why I kept reading. So I'm curious, did you like anything about this book? Did anything stand out to you as like, oh, this is cool?
So for me, what I actually found I liked was at the very beginning, you had her introduction and then her first introduction into the Fae world. And what I actually really liked was there was a little bit of world building there because you started to learn about how this world works, like in how the Fae work in this specific version of Fae courts. Because there's a lot of tropes to these kinds of stories. And I find it interesting and to see which ones they're going to lean into and which ones they're not. And I actually found a lot of the way they did the tropes in this one to be very good, such as the Fae are very good at detecting lies. And she believes that they can't even tell lies, but then she later figures out, oh no, they absolutely can lie to you. Because when you have both of those things to be true, they can't lie, and they can always detect lies. It doesn't make any sense to me. It should be one or the other. And in this case, Sarah J Maas did pick. And I like that she did instead of saying, oh, both are true. It makes sense that only one would be true. Because like if they're perfect lie detectors, no one's going to lie because they're all perfect lie detectors. Or vice versa. If they can't lie, they shouldn't be good lie detectors because they have no experience with lying. So I like that this book leaned into that kind of a concept. I also found the one part, I think it's called the Fire Knight. I found that at least conceptually to be interesting. I didn't actually like the whole way it happened. I thought it was actually an antithesis of the intent of this book, which is supposed to be a romance. And I was like, none of this is romantic. In fact, everything about this book has a lot more of a non-con type of fantasy feel rather than an actual romance story. But like I said, I did like the early part. There was a tiny bit of world building that I did like, and that's probably about it.
So it's funny that you bring up Calamai. That's the night that you're talking about, because I want you to, on your own time, and maybe this can be in the comments or something, I really want you to watch the TikTok video of Tamlin on Calamai night, because it's like this kind of somewhat famous guy on TikTok that's like hard-bodied and long blonde hair, and he's just like whipping his hair around and dancing, and it's hilarious because all the comments on that, because it was not a TikTok about Tamlin on Calamai, but all our book talk girlies get in there and they're like, it's Tamlin on Calamai. So you've got to watch that. But on that note, it is interesting because it does talk about like the value of some of the courts. And this is a little bit of it's not a spoiler, but it is an issue of contention for world building. Because one thing I did like is that I wondered what the necessity of the different types of courts were, because we have like the spring court, the night court, summer. And one thing that I thought would continue in the other books is some sort of ritual. And we kind of get it in some of them, but I think not enough. But on Calamite, it made sense that this was like a sexual ritual because it is the spring court, and like in pagan religions and all of that, like, right, rebirth and think bunny rabbits. And of course, he's going to have to mate in order to renew the magic in that area. So that was the reason for it. And she clearly wrote that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
They have to, I mean, this is part of the magic system. And there's not a lot that goes into this magic system. It's more about world building. If anything, I don't always think the magic always makes sense. They just kind of have it. Whereas, like, that one made sense to me. Like, you live in the spring court. You need your magic to be renewed. You need to complete this ritual. Okay, cool. He's just lucky because it is a sex ritual. Yay. So then I started thinking, like, well, what do the other courts do? Like, what's their ritual for their magic? And it has since never come about. So it's actually disappointed. So that is
Yeah.
a letdown that I'm spoilering you on. But I thought during this first book, had you not have read the others, that that was cool, actually.
Yeah, and that was that little bit of world building where I was like, okay, we're starting to see a little bit of this world, because prior to that, really, you'd only seen the high fae, and you knew about the existence of other fae, but you really didn't know anything about them. And I thought, okay, this is where it's going to be exposed, and I found that to be very interesting going into that. And then, like I said, for me, the payoff wasn't there, but that's what I was looking for. I was looking for that world building.
You know, oddly enough, because we get that build up in the first book, this book becomes, I mean, this series becomes more involved on like the gods of the old world. So more than not, we're learning about old gods and how that created magic, how that affects magic, and how, why they are part of why the world is how it is. But it doesn't really talk about the rest of the courts in terms of what they contribute to magic in its current state. So, like I said, bit of a spoiler there, but not, we get a payoff in other ways, because I think you'll actually find some of the old gods to be really cool, and more up your alley. But for me, not up my alley, because you know how I feel about some of the old god stuff. I'm just like, okay, so some giant titan out there just was like stupid, but you'll probably like it. But anyway, what you all need to know is that Rob has to read the second one. Rob is reading A Court of Mist and Fury. So I will not be making Rob read all of ACOTAR, just the first two books, because I'm genuinely curious. This is a research experiment, if you will, on like, okay, is the second book enough for you? Because it was enough for me. And if you ask most people what their favorite ACOTAR book is, you're going to hear A Court of Mist and Fury. And then you're going to hear the Nesta chapter, or the Nesta book, which I always forget what the name of the Nesta book is because it wasn't one of my favorites, but people love that book. Now, why I think you're going to like the second one, I'm going to talk about that just a little bit more, is we get exposed to a whole nother court entirely. We're going to get to see a lot more of the Night Court. And I think you're going to like two of the characters from the Night Court that are part of this group of warriors that can actually siphon magic into like gems or jewels, if you will, on their armor. And they use this siphoned, saved up magic to do badass shit. And then these two characters become very, very important, and I think are some of the most loved characters in the whole series. And one of them in particular is named Cassian. And Cassian is fantastic in this book series. So if you were to keep on reading past book 2, my prediction is that you will fall in love with Cassian and be so excited for the books that he's very prevalent in, which is most of them past book 2. And definitely the Nesta book, but that's, you don't know about that character much yet.
Okay. Well, we shall see.
Okay, we shall see the great social experiment of 2025 for the Reading Crossbow podcast. But moving on from that, I mentioned this briefly. I am reading on to some seconds, and just again, I am going to be covering an episode. Moving on from Serpent and Dove, I am going to be covering probably the full Sarah J Maas Crescent City books that we have thus far, and I'm definitely going to be covering the second book in Quicksilver, which is Brimstone. That's out November 18th, so I'm actually going to I'm going to do a quick read on that book and get that out for one of my solo episodes. TBD on if I'll bring Rob into any of these, but the answer's probably no. Right, Rob?
Okay. I'm fine with that.
Well, now I'm genuinely curious. So I kind of brought it up. Would you read another Crescent City? Because you've brought this up like twice now. Do you have FOMO on any of the characters? I feel like you're thinking about them a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I will probably try out the second Crescent City because I remember when you were reading it, you sent me messages like, "Oh no, that like it gets so much better after the first one." And like I said, the first one, my problems with the first one had a lot more to do with the exposition in the first part of the book, whereas I actually really liked the third act, as I mentioned earlier. So, and you were like, "Oh no, the second book is way more like that," and I was like, that's a good strong recommend for me."
Okay. Well, there's just a lot of books out there, so let's see how you respond to ACOTAR Book 2 before we go into even Crescent City Book 2, because I feel like if that's a fail for you, like if I am that wrong based on my experience, because you all should know too, because I know some of you watch this for Rob. We've talked about that. Not everyone's here for me, you know. There are a lot of people like you, Rob. So if you're here for Rob, which I estimate is a good chunk of you, what would make you read Romantasy? And I just have a feeling if it's not book 2 of ACOTAR, then I just genuinely don't know what it is. So I that also makes me genuinely worried about how you respond to other Romantasy books on the show in the future, and if we
Okay.
ever get past book 2s, because on the shelf up here we've gone to Swordcatcher and then we followed up with the Ragpicker King, and so far you've been somewhat disappointed. So I'm trying to take you back to some of the more core Romantasies to see how it goes. So I'm just going to put a pin in the
Okay.
second book of Crescent City for you.
So I can say before we even did this show, I had read one Romantasy in the past, and I actually read almost the entire series, and that was
Oh,
Outlander.
right. Yeah, that's true.
And it's because for me it was actually, I think I actually first learned about it because I heard it started off as like a Doctor Who fan fiction, and then got repurposed into its own unique story. But I found the living history of that book series to be what I really enjoyed. It wasn't necessarily the romance part was good, but it was the history part that I actually really enjoyed about that book series. So, it's not impossible.
It's hard for me to put Outlander in Romantasy because the fantasy part of it is so small. It's for me it reads more like nonfiction, just history nonfiction. Because a lot of the books that we've read, even like The Last Magician, we get magic in that book, of course we do, but to me that still falls into that nonfiction category because we have so much with the landscape of the city of New York and Charles Schwab, and we're bringing real characters into this, same as Outlander. So like both of those series for me fall into a weird genre of romantasy that's more tied to our world. And that could be, I don't know, I'm just guessing. Once you get into real fantasy, epic fantasy with like elves and fairies and more complex magic, it does open up more holes and more areas to maybe not like, because they're making this shit up, Rob. I mean, it's just they're making it up. Sadly, there's no elves and winged fairies and things like that in our real world that we know of, right? And so maybe that's why. I don't know.
No, and I very much actually like the fairy courts in Dresden Files. So they're actually one of the most interesting parts of the Dresden Files is how the fairy courts and even the vampire courts and how they interact with the real world. Actually, I found that dynamic to be one of my favorite parts of that series. So, and as we've discussed, I am a longtime D&D player, and all of these are classic D&D, heroes and villains.
Okay, okay. Well, I feel like you're finding the holes in my books, Rob, and maybe it's just all of that D&D throughout the years. Your make believe is just like on point. You're like, wait, nope, that can't happen. I'm like, how? This it's just pretend, but that's okay. More on that. If you enjoy watching this show, you've loved what we've talked about, and are interested in more, please hit subscribe. We are so close to hitting 500. Yes, I'm being cheesy and asking for your follow, but that's because we're almost to the first level of partner. So close to being there. We know that several thousand of you watch our channel every single month, and only 400 something of you have subscribed. So do us a solid, hit the button. We'd appreciate it.
And make sure you subscribe so that you will be reminded next week when Lana is back to do her solo episode on the sequel to Serpent and Dove.
See you soon. Bye, all.